When someone with an avoidant attachment style begins to catch feelings, it's one of the most powerful internal conflicts they can experience. On one hand, they're drawn to you. The connection feels real. It pulls them in. But on the other hand, it terrifies them because for an avoidant, love doesn't feel safe. Love feels like losing control, like risking rejection, vulnerable in a way they've learned their entire lives to avoid. So what happens? They start to fight it. They push back against their own emotions. They overthink, they analyze, they convince themselves that they don't need anyone. But the truth is, the stronger their feelings grow, the more they feel the urge to run. An avoidant doesn't wake up one day and decide to distance themselves because they don't care. They do it because caring hurts. It means giving someone the power to affect them emotionally, and that's something they've spent years protecting themselves from. The avoidant wants connection, but the moment they sense it's becoming real, the walls go up. They start telling themselves stories like, I'm not ready, I need space, or I don't feel the same way anymore. But deep down, what they're really saying is, I'm scared. They're scared that the moment they open up, they'll be judged, rejected, or hurt again. And here's the paradox. The more they fight their feelings, the stronger those feelings become. Because emotions don't disappear when you ignore them. They intensify. They linger in silence. They surface in dreams, in random memories, in moments when they see your name pop up on their phone and their heart skips for just a second before they remind themselves to stay detached. But you can't truly detach from what you care about. You can only pretend for so long. Tony Robbins often says, the quality of your life is the quality of your relationships. But to build real connection, you have to face your fears. And for an avoidant, ultimate challenge, it's not that they don't want love, they crave it, but they fear losing themselves in it. They've built their identity on self-reliance, on independence, on control. Love threatens that illusion because love requires surrender, requires letting someone see the parts of you that you don't even like about yourself. It requires trust. When an avoidant starts to catch feelings, they might act distant. They may take longer to reply, start withdrawing, or focus on work, hobbies, or distractions. It's their way of regaining control. They think, if I pull back first, I can't be hurt later. They rationalize that space equals safety. But the more they pull away, the more they feel that inner tension, that tug of war between wanting closeness and needing distance. It's not a lack of emotion. It's emotional overload. They're feeling more than they know how to handle, so they shut down. And if you're on the other side of that dynamic, it's easy to take it personally. You start to wonder if you did something wrong, if you were too much, if you scared them away. But understand this, the avoidant isn't rejecting you. They're protecting themselves. They're fighting a battle you can't see. They're fighting against their own desire to connect, against their fear of being abandoned, against the belief that love equals pain. When they start to feel real affection, their instinct is to armor up, to test whether it's safe to let you in. Tony would say, your mind will always try to protect you. Even if it means destroying what your heart wants most, that's what happens to the avoidant. Their mind says, don't get too close, while their heart whispers, this feels right. And in that war between fear and love, fear often wins unless they make a conscious choice to face it. That's why growth only happens when you challenge your patterns. When you stop running and start asking, what am I really afraid of? The avoidance fear is rooted in past experiences. Maybe they learned early that love was conditional, came with strings attached, or that being vulnerable led to disappointment. So they built walls to survive, but those same walls that once kept them safe are now keeping them alone. And deep inside, they know it. They might tell themselves they're happier alone, that independence is their strength, but at night when it's quiet, that loneliness creeps in. That's the moment they realize their greatest fear isn't being hurt. It's never being fully known. Catching feelings challenges everything they believed about themselves. It brings up shame, guilt. They start questioning, why can't I just relax? Why does love make me anxious? But that discomfort is growth trying to happen. It's the soul's way of saying, it's time to heal. Because when you fight your feelings, you're not protecting yourself. You're limiting yourself. You're keeping yourself trapped in a pattern that repeats every time someone gets too close. To truly change, the avoidant has to rewire the way they experience love. They have to learn that closeness doesn't mean losing freedom, that vulnerability isn't weakness, and that intimacy can coexist with independence. They have to understand that the right person doesn't want to take their space away. They want to share it. Love isn't about control, it's about connection. It's about being fully seen and still being accepted. Tony Robbins teaches that transformation begins with awareness. Once you can see your pattern, you can change it. Avoidant who starts catching feelings is being presented with a mirror, a chance to face the part of themselves that's been running for years. And it's not easy. Growth never is. How you evolve from fear to freedom. It's not about rushing to open up or forcing connection. It's about small acts of courage, replying instead of withdrawing, expressing instead of hiding, choosing to stay when it's easier to run. In the end, when an avoidant catches feelings but fights them, it's not a sign of weakness. It's a sign that something real is happening. You only fight what matters. You only resist what threatens to change you. And love will always challenge you to grow. It will expose your fears, test your patience to confront the walls you've built. But beyond those walls lies everything you've ever wanted: connection, belonging, peace. So if you're the one catching feelings and fighting them, and ask yourself, am I protecting myself from pain or am I protecting myself from love? Because they're not the same thing. Pain is temporary. Growth is permanent. Find the courage to lean into that fear instead of running from it. You'll discover that love was never the danger. It was the path to freedom all along. When an avoidant person starts to catch feelings, something profound begins to happen beneath the surface. It's not a simple attraction. It's not just affection. It's the unraveling of an emotional armor that's been built over years of self-protection. They begin to feel something real, something that stirs the heart and challenges their sense of control. But because vulnerability feels like danger to them, the first instinct isn't to lean in, it's to pull back. They'll smile. They'll show interest, and then suddenly they'll disappear into silence. It's not because they stop caring, but because caring feels like stepping in a storm they can't control. Avoidants have trained themselves to associate closeness with risk. The moment intimacy deepens, they start feeling exposed, emotionally naked. They're not used to that level of openness because it's unpredictable, and unpredictability once led to pain. Maybe in their past, love came with rejection, criticism, or abandonment. So they learned to survive by closing off. They learned to quit self-reliance with safety. Now, when someone comes along and touches those hidden emotions, threatens the system they've relied on for years to stay safe. So what do? They fight. They rationalize. They find flaws in the other person. They focus on differences instead of connection. Emotional distance, convincing themselves they're just being logical. But the truth is, logic is the shield they use to protect themselves from emotion. Deep down, the pull, the warmth of connection, the peace that comes from being seen. But they also feel the fear that history might repeat itself. That someone might hurt them the way others once did. Tony Robbins offers about the stories we tell ourselves, the narratives that define our reality. The avoidance story goes something like this. If I depend on someone, I'll lose myself. That story is protected them for years, but also keeps them lonely. It's a form of emotional self-sabotage. They want love, convince themselves they're better off without it. They say things like, I'm just not the emotional type, or I don't need anyone to make me happy. But those statements are armor. They're defenses against disappointment. Yet when they meet someone who truly reaches them, someone who sees beyond their walls, that story begins to crack. Start feeling things they didn't expect to feel. They notice how this person's presence calms them, how conversations feel natural, how silence between them doesn't feel empty. Fear intensifies because the closer they get to peace, the more they fear losing it. The heart says, this feels safe. But the mind says, that's the battle inside every avoidant. When they start to care, they'll begin acting distant, canceling plans, becoming inconsistent. It's not manipulation. It's survival. If the bond can survive distance, they're testing if the other person will chase or leave. Deep down, they're asking, if I show my real self with my fears, my flaws, my silence, will you still stay? But they don't ask that directly. Instead, they retreat, they wait, they analyze. It's their way of managing the chaos of emotion. They believe space gives them clarity. This often amplifies what they're trying to suppress. And this is where the transformation begins, because catching feelings challenges an avoidant to grow in ways they never expected. They start questioning the beliefs they've held for years. They wonder why love feels like danger when it's supposed to feel good. They start noticing that the loneliness they once called freedom doesn't feel as liberating anymore. They realize that independence without connection feels hollow. Without emotional depth doesn't satisfy the soul. Tony Robbins says, if you want to change your life, you have to raise your standards. For an avoidant, as raising the standard for what love means, it means understanding that love isn't weakness, it's strength. It's not something that limits you. It expands you. But to experience that, risk being known. They have to risk being misunderstood. They have to risk being vulnerable. That's the hardest part, surrendering to what they can't control. When an avoidant catches feelings, I need time to figure things out. But what they're really saying is, I need time to make peace with this new part of myself. The part that wants connection. The part that's tired of pretending they don't need anyone. The part that's brave enough to admit they care. That inner shift is powerful because it means their heart is starting to open, even if their actions don't show it yet. If you've ever loved an avoidant, you've probably seen this conflict play out. One moment they're affectionate, the next they're distant. One moment they're all in, seem detached. But behind that inconsistency is fear. Fear of loss, fear of rejection, fear of vulnerability. They want to trust you, but trust for them isn't natural, it's learned. They need to see that your presence isn't conditional, that your care doesn't vanish when they withdraw. They need to experience emotional safety before they can give it. Tony often says that human beings have two primary fears: we're not enough, and we won't be loved. The avoidant lives in both of those fears. They push people away to avoid the pain of confirming them. Only way out of those fears is through them. They have to learn that love doesn't mean losing independence. It means expanding it. Because when you love from a place of security, you don't lose yourself, a deeper version of yourself. The avoidant who's catching feelings is standing at the edge of transformation. Every instinct says, voice, the one they've ignored for years, says, stay. Stay with the discomfort. Stay with the uncertainty. Stay with the person who makes you feel something real. What they're running from isn't love. It's their own fear of being loved. And if they can face that, everything changes. The truth is, love will challenge every wound you've ever buried. It will expose every lie you've told yourself to stay safe. And that's exactly why it's so powerful. Because healing doesn't come from staying comfortable. It comes from stepping into the unknown. I'm scared, but I'm here. That's the moment the avoidant stops fighting their feelings and starts facing them. And slowly, they begin to see that love isn't the enemy. Avoidance is. They realize that pushing people away never truly kept them safe. It just kept them stuck. They start letting themselves be seen, not all at once. Piece by piece, they open up in small moments. A glance, a text, a word of honesty, those moments, those smaller victories, because every act of vulnerability chips away at the armor that once defined them. Tony Robbins says, where focus goes, energy flows. When the avoidance stops focusing on fear and starts focusing on connection, the world begins to shift. They start seeing love not as a threat, but as a teacher. They learn that closeness doesn't destroy freedom, it gives it meaning. They realize that the very thing they've been running from, emotional connection, is what their soul has been craving all along. Catching feelings is not the problem, fighting them is. Because in that resistance, they create their own suffering. They deny themselves the joy of being known, of being understood, of being loved. But when they stop running, when they finally let the walls crack, something incredible happens. They start to feel alive again. They start to trust again. Realize that love was never meant to take away their strength. It was meant to reveal it. When an avoidant person begins to catch feelings, it's like watching a storm form behind calm eyes. There's warmth building inside them, a spark that feels unfamiliar and intense. For the first time in a long time, someone's presence makes them feel both safe and terrified. Because everything about this connection feels good, yet something inside screams that it's dangerous. That's the essence of the avoidant struggle. They want to love, they want to connect, but love reminds them of everything they've worked to protect themselves from. It's not that they don't care, they care too much, and that's what scares them. And avoidance' first instinct when they start to care deeply is to retreat. They pull away, not because they've lost interest, but because they feel exposed, suddenly become distant after a deep conversation, or disappear for a few days after a beautiful moment. To the other person, it looks like rejection or indifference, but in reality, it's panic. It's their emotional defense system activating, the system that says, don't get too close. Remember what happened last time. For them, closeness equals danger, vulnerability equals loss of control, and love equals potential pain. What they don't realize, at least not consciously, is that their fear of being hurt is stronger than their desire to be loved. They're not running from you. They're running from what love might reveal about themselves. Because real intimacy doesn't just connect two people. It exposes the parts of you you've tried to hide. And that's what terrifies the avoidant most, being truly seen. When someone starts to break through their emotional barriers, they begin to feel things they've suppressed for years. Tenderness, longing, dependency, hope. These emotions make them feel vulnerable, and vulnerability in their mind equals danger. Tony Robbins often says, you can't experience true love if you're not willing to be vulnerable. That's the crossroads where the avoidant stands. They're faced with a choice to stay safe behind the walls, into the unknown, and risk getting hurt. It's not that they don't want love. They do, but they've learned to associate love with loss. Somewhere in their past, they reached out for affection and got hurt. Maybe it was a parent who was emotionally distant, or a relationship that ended in betrayal. Whatever the origin, it taught them one powerful lesson. Don't rely on anyone but yourself. So they grew up believing independence is everything. They pride themselves on control, on strength, on not needing anyone. And for years, that story works. They build a life that looks stable, career, goals, routines, but underneath there's emptiness. Because human beings are wired for connection, and no amount of success or distraction can fill the void where love belongs. When someone finally comes along who touches that part of them, shakes the foundation of who they think they are, suddenly their emotions don't obey logic anymore. They find themselves missing that person, thinking about them, caring about their opinion. It feels like losing control, and for an avoidant, losing control feels like losing safety. They start to analyze everything. They'll think, why am I feeling this way? Is this even real? I'm better off alone. They'll convince themselves that the timing isn't right, that they need space, or that the relationship is too complicated. Stories the mind creates to rationalize fear. The real truth is that love is starting to crack open their emotional armor, and that's something they've spent years avoiding. They're not used to feeling so deeply, and it scares them because it threatens the illusion of control they've built around their heart. Tony Robbins teaches that every emotion has a purpose, even fear. Fear is a signal that there's something to learn, something to grow from. When the avoidant starts to catch feelings, their fear is trying to protect them from pain. It's also showing them where they need to heal. The discomfort they feel is not a sign that love is wrong. It's a sign that healing is happening. Love is revealing the places where they've been wounded, parts of themselves that have been closed off for too long. When they begin to fight their feelings, they might overcompensate by acting detached or busy. They'll dive into work, spend less time communicating, try to convince themselves they don't care, but suppression only intensifies the emotion. The more they try to avoid love, the more it consumes their thoughts. That's why avoidants often find themselves in cycles of push and pull. They want to be close, then they retreat, then they miss the connection, and they come back. It's not manipulation, it's confusion. And wants to open in a mind that refuses to let it. The truth is, the avoidant isn't cold or heartless. They're wounded. They've built emotional walls not because they feel too deeply. Their sensitivity has always been a strength they were taught to see as weakness. Love confronts that lie. Love says, you can be strong and still need someone. You can be independent and still desire closeness, but before they can believe that, they have to unlearn years of emotional conditioning. Tony Robbins would say, if you want a breakthrough, you've got to break something. For the avoidant, that something is the belief that love and pain are the same. They have to break the association between vulnerability and danger. To learn that being seen doesn't mean being judged, that letting someone in doesn't mean losing control. It's a process, slow, messy, uncomfortable, but it's the path to freedom. When they start to let go of control, they begin to see that love doesn't destroy them, it strengthens them. They notice that opening up doesn't make them weak, it makes them human. The more they face their fear, the more they realize that what they were running from was never love itself, but their own unhealed wounds. And as they heal, they start to approach love differently. They stop viewing affection as a threat and start seeing it as a partnership, a space where two people can grow together, not lose themselves. When an avoidant finally allows themselves to love fully, one of the most beautiful transformations you can witness, because they don't love halfway. Once they feel safe, once they trust, they love deeply, fiercely, and loyally. To that point takes the courage to face part of themselves that resists love. It takes self-awareness to say, I'm not running this time. It takes faith to believe that this time won't break them, it will build them. Tony often says, change happens when the pain of staying the same is greater than the pain of change. Eventually, the avoidant reaches that moment. They realize that pushing love away hurts more than risking it. That loneliness isn't safety, it's just isolation dressed as strength. They understand that love isn't a loss of freedom, expansion of it. Because when you're truly loved, you don't lose yourself, you finally become your whole self. The avoidant catching feelings but fighting them is a powerful symbol of transformation and motion. It's the human struggle between fear and love, between protection and growth. Every time they pull away, they're given a choice to stay stuck in old patterns or to step into something new. And every time they choose to lean into love, even just a little, they reclaim a piece of themselves that fear once controlled. In the end, the battle isn't between the avoidant and the person they love. It's between the avoidant and their own heart. Love is trying to teach them something that connection isn't the enemy, fear is. That vulnerability isn't a threat. It's the doorway to everything real. And that no matter how long they've been running, there will come a moment when they realize love wasn't the thing to be avoided that was meant to set them free. When an avoidant person starts to catch feelings, it's a battle between the heart and the mind. Their heart begins to wake up. It starts to feel warmth, care, desire, but their mind immediately steps in to shut it down. The mind says, this isn't safe. Don't go there. They've spent so much of their life relying on logic, control, independence, that when love shows up, it threatens everything they've built to protect themselves. They've survived by staying detached, and suddenly, presence starts to melt the armor they've worn for years. That's when the fear begins to whisper, what if they hurt you? What if they leave? So instead of leaning in, not because they don't care, because caring feels like losing control, Tony Robbins often says, the strongest force in human personality is the need to stay consistent with who we believe we are. For the avoidant, they believe they are self-sufficient, someone who doesn't need love to survive. When feelings start to grow, it threatens that identity. Suddenly, they don't recognize themselves. They're thinking about someone more than they want to. They care about what that person thinks. They feel joy when they're close, but anxiety when they're apart. This emotional intensity feels foreign, even dangerous. So they do what they've always done when something feels risky. They pull away. They go quiet. They convince themselves that distance equals safety. But deep down, the heart doesn't understand avoidance. It only knows connection. And the more they suppress their feelings, the stronger the emotional undercurrent becomes. They'll try to distract themselves, throw their energy into work, hobbies, or solitude, but the feelings always find a way back. They'll see that person's name and feel that familiar ache, that rush of warmth and fear all at once. It's not weakness. It's the beginning of healing, a sign that love is pushing against old walls. Avoidant has built those walls for a reason. Somewhere along the line, love was associated with pain, rejection, or disappointment. Maybe they reached out for affection as a child and were met with criticism or coldness. Maybe they loved someone deeply and were abandoned. Whatever the experience taught them that emotions are dangerous, that vulnerability leads to loss. So they made a vow, consciously or not, never again. They promised themselves they would stay strong, stay independent, never need anyone. That vow became their survival strategy. But the truth is you can't build true strength on fear. Strength isn't closing off. It's the courage to open up again, even after being hurt. When they start to catch feelings, it's like the universe giving them a second chance. Love is calling them to rewrite the story they've believed for so long. But instead of seeing it as an opportunity, threat. So they fight it. They might start picking apart the relationship, focusing on flaws or convincing themselves it's not the right time. They'll say things like, I'm not ready, or I need space to think. But these are just masks for fear. They're trying to rationalize emotions that can't be rationalized. Tony Robbins says, change happens when you associate enough pain with the old and enough pleasure with the new. The avoidant hasn't done that yet. They still associate love with pain. Begin to experience genuine connection, kindness, patience, safety. Something starts to shift. The mind still resists, but the heart starts to whisper, maybe this time is different. Maybe this person isn't like the ones before. Maybe they won't run when things get hard. Maybe love can be safe. For the real growth begins when curiosity starts to override fear. In those moments of growth, they'll find themselves torn between two worlds. The world of isolation that feels safe and the world of connection that feels alive. They'll try to balance both, being half and half out, but love doesn't thrive in halfway measures. Love demands presence. It requires courage. It asks them to do the very thing they've avoided their entire lives to trust. Trust not that everything will be perfect, but that they'll survive even if it's not. The avoidant will often think they're protecting themselves from heartbreak, but what they're really doing is protecting themselves from intimacy. They're not afraid of being hurt. They're afraid of being seen, because being seen means someone could see the parts they don't love about themselves. The insecurities, the fears, the emotional needs. But love doesn't expose those things to shame you. It exposes them to heal you. When the right person comes along, they don't want to use your wounds against you. They want to understand them. But for the avoidant, letting someone that close feels like giving up control. Tony says, if you can't change your state, you can't change your life. For an avoidant in the state, they need to change his fear. They've lived in it for so long that it feels like home. But the moment they start to face it, the moment they stop running, everything changes. Because when you stop running from love, see that love was never the problem. It was the fear surrounding it. Love isn't loss of control. It's the realization that control was never the goal. Love is flow, trust, surrender, the things that make life meaningful. And avoidant catching feelings is a sign that their heart is trying to evolve. Every instinct tells them to pull away, but that discomfort is actually growth. They feel as a stop sign, it's a signal that they're on the edge of transformation. Because what they're experiencing isn't danger, it's expansion. Their emotions are expanding beyond their comfort zone, and that's exactly how people grow. Eventually, they reach a crossroads. They can either stay safe and unfulfilled or step forward into the unknown and discover what love really means. And in that moment, they realize something powerful. Love isn't something you lose control in. It's something you build together. It's two people walking side by side, not one consuming the other. It's not about losing independence. It's about expanding it. Love from wholeness instead of fear. You don't lose yourself. You become more of yourself. When the avoidant finally stops fighting their feelings, it's not because they've stopped being afraid. It's because they've realized that love is worth the fear. They begin to see vulnerability not as weakness, but as courage. They start showing up more. They reply instead of disappearing. They stay even when it's uncomfortable. They begin to share parts of themselves they've never shared before. Those small moments are milestones, proof that healing is happening. Tony Robbins says the secret to living is giving, and love at its core is giving presence, giving understanding, giving truth. For the avoidant, this realization is life-changing, because once they stop guarding themselves, they can finally give, and in giving, they receive more love than they ever thought possible. They begin to understand that love doesn't take away freedom. It multiplies it. It gives life color, depth, meaning. And maybe for the first time, they look at the person in front of them, the one who stayed patient through their silence, who saw through their defenses, and they realize they're safe. That love doesn't have to hurt. Being seen doesn't have to be shameful. That open their heart doesn't mean losing control. It means finally finding peace. When that realization hits, something inside them softens. The walls don't crumble all at brick. They start to fall. And as those walls fall, they step into a new truth. Love isn't the enemy. Fear is. And the only way to win that battle is to stop fighting what's real, to let love in even when it feels terrifying, and trust that what's meant for you will never destroy you.